Today I'm going to talk about prescribed fire associations, and a lot of times I talk about it in terms of statistics and numbers and acreage. And I think kind of following in the theme of what the Prescribed Fire Council has been talking about today and sort of where we're at today in natural resource management, we need to talk about it more in terms of who got you there and who was part of that fire and who connected you. And so that's what I'm going to focus on today. I have a lot of slides I want to get through, so I'm also going to try to be fairly timely here. But this is kind of the timeline of our association's development, starting in 2006 with our inception when we became a nonprofit, and all the way up until 2022, where we're in the middle of this ramp project. Interestingly, most of the points on this timeline are actually just grant proposals. And that's kind of how things work in the nonprofit world when you're working with 2 and 3 year project timelines like we do. You write your proposal, you get your funding, and then you carry out that project. And somewhere in the middle there, you start dreaming up a new flavor of proposal. You try to get that into place so that you have funding to continue. And it's this kind of leapfrog pattern that you eventually get used to, if never completely comfortable with. Let me ask this to begin with. How many folks in this room burn agency land? Let's start there, just raise your hand. Agency land of some kind, state, federal, whatever. Okay, how many folks burn what they would consider to be private land? All right, of those folks, how many burn private landowners' land? You're lighting the match in the forest where their home exists, where they will be sleeping that night. Okay, a little fewer. It's a very different thing, isn't it? It's a very, very different thing. Illinois has about 37 million acres in it. The Prescribed Fire Needs Assessment dealt with about 1 million of those acres. Most of the fire needs were documented in agency land, either state or federal. The outcome of that needs assessment was that we needed to do about, 3 times more burning, right? But 82% of the forests in our state are private land. And I don't think the needs assessment quite reflects how big of an obstacle that really is. Private land burning started down in our area back in 2000. You might remember Dr. Ruffner. He's a character. He's an important character in this industry. And this was essentially his lab. This was his outdoor lab. But what it really did, besides developing a lot of new students and a lot of new burn practitioners with really good training and good habits, it introduced the private landowners in our area to the idea of a volunteer or near volunteer burn crew. This would be the first time that we really had a burn crew that was not a contractor, not a large established contractor with a standing crew that was there every morning ready to receive orders. This was a very different thing. And they got a lot burned in the beginning. They started growing, they started developing contacts and networking with the landowners down there, and very quickly discovered that there was way more need than they had time for, or they had the resources for it. We only had 2 contractors down there. We still only have 2 contractors down there who actually do fire on a large scale basis, a commercial basis, I should say. So these landowners started learning what fire could do. They started getting used to the idea. The fire dogs started putting a lot more fire down. People started talking. There were conferences, and it very quickly outgrew what the fire dogs were able to do. These students had to schedule around classes, and they had to schedule around Dr. Ruffner's availability, and their resources were limited. And in that time, the people in the southern 11 counties started talking and started figuring out that what they really needed was a volunteer-based fire solution that removed as many of those barriers and resource scarcities as possible. And in 2006, the Burn Association was formed. This was a combined effort with SIU Fire Dogs, SIU University, and of course the IDNR was a huge part of it. There were some Pheasants Forever contingent in the area, and a good handful of private landowners that all had expressed kind of this similar land ethic. And the result was immediate. There was a very, very quick acceptance of this association. Membership began growing fairly rapidly, and they even, they'd started with a C2000 grant, but that coordinator that was hired for that immediately realized that things were growing quickly and that more funding and more resources were going to be needed. And if you're not familiar with prescribed burn associations, it's okay, because we only had this one. This was the first one in the state. Really, Illinois had not seen this before. They'd seen burning from other aspects, other agencies, other cooperatives, but not like this. This was a new model. Now, it was based on Western models, range management associations. And I know a lot of folks might be familiar with the Edwards Plateau Burn Association. There's some in Oklahoma, some in Texas. And this was modeled after that, and Dr. Ruffner was a big part of that. Obviously, some things had to be adjusted. We had a really different fuel model here. We had a really different kind of population density. And we have some of the more worrisome, I would say, wildland-urban interface in the area, in the Midwest maybe. Immediately we realized that we were going to need more training. And we also realized that even while we were gaining that training, we were going to need leadership and burn bosses and some people to really guide the process, because we knew then, as we knew now, as everybody here has recognized today, that it only takes one incident and you're done, right? And we did not want to blink out so quickly. So the IDNR was extremely good at integrating their staff, particularly their forestry and their natural heritage staff, with our folks. And so we had some really good training. We developed prescribed fire managers pretty quickly, so that we had some burn bosses, and they availed themselves to us really nicely. When I started grad school at SIU a long time ago, Dr. Ruffner steered me towards the idea of starting to document what exactly is this model. And we realized that the original point of the Burn Association was to try to spread this as far around the state as we could. So we needed to find a way to kind of make a documented model of that would be repeatable. And I found a few things that I at the time thought were the main points, right? Graduate research showed that you needed that common land ethic. You had to have a coordinator. That was a really important part of it. If you didn't have that, people just couldn't coalesce with the kind of energy that you needed. And then the challenges that I identified at the time were funding and liability. So we'll get back to this real quick. We'll see how we did with that. I'm going to, spoiler alert, I would change all that research now if I could and redo that thing. We've learned a lot since then. So the first thing we did was we chose a new partner. We needed a good grant administrator. And I know a lot of you that have worked with grants know that that reporting process and all of the background work that goes into running a grant-funded project can sometimes be bigger than the project itself. And so we needed the Shawnee Resource and Conservation and Development Group to help us kind of run that background machinery. There's a lot of invoicing that goes on. There's a lot of subcontracting that goes on, and they were able to help us with that in a really professional manner. When we first started in 2006, we were with the Regional Planning and Development Commission out of Harrisburg, Illinois. They dealt more with things like infrastructure and really just city infrastructure. So they were game to try to administer our grants, but this really wasn't their wheelhouse. They did a great job for a number of years, and I think it wasn't until 2012 or so that we switched over to the Shawnee RC&D. One of the first partners that we joined up with was the River to River CWMA. At the time, there were maybe a couple CWMAs in the area. These guys were kind of small. They were almost a fledgling, really, but have really grown under the leadership of Nick Seaton. And at this point, they are serving as kind of I would say the knowledge base. They are the clearinghouse for invasive species research and public education, public outreach for invasive species work. So they teamed up with us. We started writing grants that funded both of us together with the idea that it had to be we wanted to make sure we had comprehensive management. We were really worried that people would see fire incorrectly as a solution in itself, and we were very keenly aware that obviously that wasn't the only part. You couldn't just burn and get what you needed. All the research was pointing to weed management and brush management and really forest management being a comprehensive thing. So in 2006, stepping back to when we first formed, we chose these 6 counties here in southeastern Illinois. Paducah's down here, and we went all the way up to the top of Saline County. And that was a lot to cover. We had maybe 20 or 30 members. We burned a lot of fuel trying to cover all those counties. We had members from all those different counties that were requiring things like fire line production. They needed to be, we needed to go and map things. We needed to go and write burn plans. We needed to check their fire lines, several times. Then we had to do the burn. Then we did, follow-up burns. And that kept us very busy for a while. At this point in time, we cover the southern 11 counties. Now this change happened in 2020. And this was something we did because we really felt like we had the capacity to cover more. This was about the time when we started realizing the fire needs assessment meant that everyone was going to have to push their capabilities. So we went for it. And we expanded river, this being kind of the beginning of the growing season here. They would be talking about foliar treatments. They would be training on, what kind of herbicide mixes and application equipment would be appropriate, and get everybody kind of primed and full of knowledge. They go through invasive species identification courses and everything that's necessary. Then they get their on-the-ground results with the FRST. So these folks, this way you can get your neighbors to your property to help you actually make some progress. Then, here we come. We can, for the places that it's appropriate for, we're kind of well positioned to provide this training and equipment and leadership for the burns themselves. And so then we can apply prescribed fire to make sure that these landowners are getting their comprehensive management. That program is still in process. We came up with that several years ago, and we've written a couple of grants to kind of expand and support that process. And it's still being successful, so we're still funding it. The neat thing that's kind of started happening, it's been 15 years. We've been doing this for a long time now, I guess. And we have always coordinated really well with the IDNR. We've always felt like they were valued partners. And in some parts of the state, that might have been common for a long time. It wasn't so common down in southeastern Illinois. there wasn't always a positive feeling between agencies and the private landowners down there. And so because they were so integral in helping the Burn Association get off the ground, it developed this really good kind of mutual respect between the private landowners and the agency. And when it came time to start burning state land, SIPA wanted to be part of that. The Burn Association wanted to give back to the state. And so what was really neat was watching the sort of the spirit of the membership as they got excited about the opportunity to go help at Trail of Tears State Forest. Or Dixon Springs State Park, some of the other state lands in the area that we were working in, because they knew that by supporting the state employees, those state employees would then have more time and resources to devote to the Burn Association, and so there was this really mutually beneficial relationship. The same thing started happening on federal land. And a lot of the folks in our area never really thought they would get to this point. Even some of the federal folks were surprised that this happened as nicely as it did. But we started being able to be part of these federal burns, and a lot of the Shawnee Forest folks were really, really supportive of our association, and we started integrating those crews a little bit and integrating our burns. And that's when it got really exciting. And this burn right here is a multi-agency, multi-ownership burn out in the Kincaid area that includes 4 or 5 private landowners and a big chunk of state land. And it's being lit right here, as you see, with a Forest Service helicopter. So that kind of cooperative work led to another new idea called the Cross-Boundary Fire Initiative. And this idea was to formalize the agreement between the public and the private burn practitioners and start making this landscape scale thing that we always talk about an actual reality. So instead of just drawing it on maps and saying, we're going to try to get all this area burned, we could actually make that a single burn unit and start planning it as a discrete, single unit, and then bring all the organizations that are represented in that ownership and do that burn as a big landscape. And that often included many different agencies, many different ownerships. And so that was so successful for the first year that we started adding staff and support to that. So now we have 3 contracted coordinators for that initiative and a couple of grant-funded fire techs that are helping to develop those landscape scale burns. And that's a lot of mapping, a lot of outreach, and a lot of work with the public to make sure that everybody's on board, expectations are well managed, and we've had many thousands of acres of successful burns at this point that I think we would call cross-boundary burns. The neat thing about that is that we're all getting bigger acreages for this, because obviously the burn lines don't have to be as complicated. And so I think everybody's burn acreage, as we report at the end of the year, is going up steadily, and it's largely due to this effort. We couldn't have gotten very far without the U of I Extension Forestry folks. And one of the things that they're really good at is teaching. And obviously we made sure that we took advantage of that. So we got a lot of great live fire training from them. We did some great identification days and some really good kind of field days for our volunteers taught by the U of I Extension folks. And they also just do a great job of hosting us. And so we're able to show up there with an agenda and a group of folks, and we can put a great program on, and they have kind of the perfect setting for that. And recently they've been putting some resources into producing some really nice training materials. So they got this drone that has a really nice camera, and they're able to fly our fires and then put together tutorials on what a good backing fire or a good flanking fire should look like, and why you would use these different ignition techniques. And they can do it with aerial photography, which is obviously a huge bonus and really helps with understanding what you're trying to get across. So this is one of the photos from that. And we have to thank Chris Evans and Kevin Rowling of the Dixon Springs Extension Forestry for really being there for us. Another partner, the Nature Conservancy. So the Southern Illinois program has really been ramping up recently, and they've created a lot of neat new resources. One is the Women in Fire program, which I think is a co-op with the Forest Service, am I right? So, so they've got kind of a really nice new fire crew and some really good equipment to back them up. The Nature Conservancy has always been a really good partner in terms of showing up at a burn where we needed extra help, or helping to support us, in some way when we needed more numbers. But since they've become such a force, a fire crew of their own, they've actually become really integral to these cross-boundary burns as well. So when we do a multi-ownership burn, we're factoring their crew in as a complete flank of their own, a completely self-contained crew. Theron Hobson is the director of that program right now. Caleb's here today. So those guys have really been there for us as well. And I know this just sounds like a huge thank you, but that's exactly what it is. And we wouldn't get any of this done if we didn't all get there and work on it together. Another new thing that we've been accessing is local homeowner associations. So we always kind of dealt with individual landowners. Sometimes you would get an organizational member, like a land trust or something. But when we started talking to homeowner associations, that's when we really sort of realized how much power a community, these kind of micro communities actually have. They create a whole lot of volunteer hours, for one, if you're interested in grant metrics, but they also, you're accessing a huge section of the population that you can often get on your side. You can often show them really good examples of forest management in their own backyards, in a place that they know intimately and they feel responsible for. And then these people will really become supportive of the idea quickly, because they can see it change in real time every day when they wake up, and they have had their hands on that management. And so there's 3 homeowner associations down in Southern Illinois that we've been working with, and I think that is the beginning of maybe the next program. I think what we're going to start doing, a couple of them have looked into forming land management programs of their own that deal just with their property. And in some cases, this is many, many acres. So they're almost going to be like a micro model of what we're doing. Again, it's a repeatable model. You just scale it as necessary. I need another slide here. Oh. I'm about to be signed out by, oh, don't do that. Now it wants to restart. Maybe I shouldn't push buttons. I'm a Mac guy, so mine doesn't do that.
There's no way around it. It's
Okay.
the Bureau's technology. Sorry.
That's all right. Is it going to restart? I have to go by memory?
8 minutes.
I have 8 minutes. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We're off to the races.
Oh my goodness. Did it switch?
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, one of the things that I always try to make a point of is that when you're working with the public like this, you can blur the lines. It doesn't matter who's who. It doesn't matter who works with who or for who. You're working together, and that's the point, and that's what the public appreciates, and that's how you get that public buy-in. In every one of these pictures, it's essentially a picture of private landowners that have come together with their neighbors to do this burn project. But in every one of these pictures, there are also agency personnel. You can't always pick them out. You can't always tell who's the pro and who's the landowner. Sometimes the landowner's wearing a lot better Nomex. Sometimes the pro looks a lot more worn out. But my point is, every one of these group shots represents a moment when the public got to work arm in arm with the public or with the agency officials that serve their area, their community. And those relationships have grown and have become, friendships and working relationships and positive experiences. So now the public trusts the state folks and they trust the federal folks. And Scott Christ is a familiar name in many households in Southern Illinois, and people smile when they hear his name. Wasn't always like that, Scott. All right? This thing is biting me.
You can't help them up and do it.
I can just do it like that, right?
Should.
Okay. These are the numbers for this year. Or actually for the last 10 years. Now, we didn't have the greatest records up to 2012, so I apologize that I can't reach back quite that far. But these are the acreage numbers. And we have a general positive trend here. We're doing better. Much of that is due to the cross-boundary burn program. You can see 2020, that was the pandemic slump, we call it. Since 2006, we've done almost 29,000 acres, and the average size of those burns is 65 acres, so that's a lot of burns. And that is because that's what land ownership looks like in Southern Illinois. 461 individual burns, and we're floating around 200 members that kind of come and go as they remember to pay their dues. The current grant is the Regional Adaptive Management Partnership Grant, just another iteration of that comprehensive management model that I was talking about. And project value is just about $363,000. That's a pretty typical size for this project. That's a 2-year project. This I want to make sure I mention for sure. The Ignite Illinois project that we're working on was originally designed to create a replication of the prescribed burn model. And the secondary purpose of that was to support the idea of better legislation and better burn boss certification processes and things like that. So we're working hand in hand. I'll go into that if I have time here. The Great Rivers Prescribed Burn Association is our first replication. We have officially made our amoeba split now, and they now cover 9 counties up there in what they're calling southwestern Illinois. I think that's more like northern Illinois, but they are mostly the same model that we are. They had to make a few adjustments. They've got an excellent board and some really good initial partners and some individual landowners, and have had a season of success already. The leader of that group, the coordinator, is Brent Macero from Prairie Engineers. But you see here, we've got all kinds of interesting folks. Scott Moss from Lewis and Clark Community College, he has a restoration ecology course. I call him the Ruffner of the North. He's got this kind of fire crew, student fire crew, that they have their own equipment. They do a lot of the same things, kind of burning on private land as a field course. And it was the perfect place to plug this first iteration in, because we wanted that model to fit as closely as possible. And it worked. They had to go through all of the growing pains that a nonprofit goes through. One of the challenges that they continue to have, that we all have, is membership expectations. When you're working with the public and you're trying to restore the forest, it's really important to be clear about what you're trying to accomplish and what that accomplishment's going to look like. And I think everybody here probably understands what I'm saying, but when you're working with a prescribed burn association and you're trying to retain membership, it's really, really important. They did, let's see, 140 acres in a few burns. And some of those were pretty complex burns, actually. They did one IDOT-owned prairie and an IDNR managed prairie. This was the first time that we actually were able to get together with the Illinois Department of Transportation on a burn, which was pretty amazing, actually. There's a picture of it right here. This is that Route 66 prairie. So Henry was there. We got it burned safely. It went really well, I think. I haven't seen it since, so hopefully it looks great, he says. Okay, great. That's all the approval we need. So it looks great. We did not cause any accidents. The only car that caught on fire was actually a little north of that intersection, and it was not our fault. So it was a Suburban with bad brakes. So for them, the future direction is to kind of take that adaptation and start thinking about what the next iteration is going to be, what the next model is going to be. This is what we cover right now in terms of area. You see this obvious gap right here? That's Joanne. And perhaps we will be coming to your county soon.
But you've got it included on your map.
Yeah, well, okay. Yeah, that's just wishful thinking then. Okay, so we really do want to fill in the gap. We want to close that up and make that a well-serviced area from the top of the GRPBA all the way down to the bottom of the state. And we will feel like we have really made a difference there. And we can start resource sharing. We can start sharing training regimens. And I think at that point we will really have kind of a larger, we're restarting. Okay. Well, the only other thing that I wanted to mention was that one of the things that the GRPBA and SIPA both came to a conclusion on is that risk and liability are the challenge that we're most worried about right now. And of all the things that I listed that I thought were important back when I did my research, what it really comes down to now is how do we make sure that we are properly protected from liability for what we're doing? Because everybody knows it's not a question of if but when, right? And burning agency land, even burning land trust land is a little different. We don't have a lot of volunteer agreements. We can make people sign stuff, but there's only so much that can do for you. Right now, there still isn't a good solution for prescribed burn practitioner insurance coverage in this state. That's something that we've been working on. Fran Hardy's been working on it. The Prescribed Burn Council's been working on it. The bills that were introduced at the last session were shot down. So we had high hopes for that. We think maybe we have a plan for the next shot at that. But every time that doesn't work out is another season or 2 or 3 that I go, Caleb goes, a bunch of us go with really no protection for what we're doing. We have some institutional assurances, we have some agreements, we have some ethereal, hope that somehow we're protected by the Prescribed Burn Act as it stands. But without that gross negligence clause, we can't buy insurance. And that's a problem. It limits the amount of acreage we can burn. It limits the amount of contractors in the state that can do that. It basically limits everything that the Prescribed Fire Council outlined as a solution to the fire needs assessment. So I don't have a lot of good solutions for that. But I encourage everybody here to stay tuned to the progress of the efforts of the Prescribed Fire Council to come up with better legislation and push those legislators to understand what we're trying to do. And whatever the process is that gets us from here to being able to purchase a prescribed fire practitioner's insurance policy is that path needs to be trod. We need to make that happen. Or it's not a question of if, but when. One of us is gonna go under the bus. And, 85% or so of the land of the forest in Illinois is privately owned. There's no way we're gonna be able to meet the goals that we've outlined unless more of us private practitioners are able to do what we do. So that's my little soapbox there at the end, without the benefit of a bunch of slides to back me up. So thanks everybody, and I think we might have a minute or two for questions.
Any questions? We got 10 minutes.
Yeah, Debbie.
Oh, I just wanted to say that the prescribed farm legislation, the next time you guys do it, you've got to get the message out. I literally found out about it almost after the fact from a random volunteer that burns with me just occasionally. I had never heard of this at all. And we could really mobilize the troops to contact legislators if we knew about it. So that, and not just within our little burn community, but we need to get the word out to lots of people, so.
Yeah, totally agree, and I think Fran and everybody else would agree with that. I'm not sure we even knew who all the players were when we were trying to get that together, and I had not been on the Prescribed Fire Council long enough to even really understand the process. So I'm new to this too, but I think now we all realize that we're just all going to have to go in on this, and everybody's going to have to find a way that they can contribute, and it might just be getting the word out, or I don't know, Bill. There's so many people in here understand this better than I do. I am not the right person to be standing in front of you talking about the process of that, but I might be the biggest proponent for getting that solution done, because it's only my career, and it's only my 200 people and my 11 counties, and to me that's everything. So.
15
Is Fran
years.
in the room?
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Fran, what
Fran,
Is Fran around? Is he doing? What's he doing? He's in the other one. Yeah, he's heard my thing. If you guys know Fran, pin him down and ask him for some updates. It might be worth having him do some kind of a presentation on progress, at this point. So yeah.
We feel this year was round one, and we'll be back to it continuously until we get what we want. We're just learning how to play the game.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, can you get access to the IDNR bird boss certificate? Who holds those? And maybe do some mailings to them when you start this approach. And if you mailed me, I'm sure I could get 200 other people to write letters without a problem. If we just start flooding the legislatures with letters, that's the way to bring about change. And, they start getting them big folders full of letters from people on their desk, and it motivates them to quit getting those.
You're saying get the practitioners to be outspoken about their needs.
Yeah, if you got every practitioner to go get 200 people more,
Yeah, I could see that
I
being.
can see us getting 40, 50,000 letters sent to legislators, and all of a sudden, we can bring about some change.
Yeah, I could see that being part of the solution.